Today's webinar is titled, An Introduction to Feng Shui for Your Home. Our presenter today is RIT alumnus Nicholas Cheong, a mortgage banker in Denver, Colorado, and an expert and consultant on Feng Shui in his spare time. Nicholas graduated from RIT in 2010 with a master's degree in communication and media technologies. He represents Singapore informally in Colorado. He is one of the leaders of the RIT Alumni Chapter in Colorado, and he is an active member of that community. Nicholas, we're thrilled to have you with us for this mystical topic, so let's get going. Take it away.
Thank you, Cindy. Can everyone hear me fine?
I can hear you fine, so I think you're good. Perfect.
So again, the topic today is Introduction to Feng Shui for Homeowners. And just as a side note, I do a lot of public speaking events as well, and these are just some of the other topics that I talk about. I also do talk about Feng Shui for the small business owner, among other stuff. So let's get going. So today's agenda, I'll be introducing you to the topic of Feng Shui, and then I will talk about the topics of household direction, shape, geography, history, and other miscellaneous stuff. The purpose of this presentation today is to just arm you with enough information to be dangerous, so to speak, so that when you're in a situation, for example, if you're buying a new home, you will remember enough information from this presentation in order to ask the right questions or to do the research necessary in order to make the right decision on how to proceed with the Feng Shui of your house. And one thing I want to note is that in 99% of cases, bad Feng Shui can be mitigated, and that is going to be the overarching theme of today's presentation as well. So I'm going to talk in generalities as well as how to mitigate bad Feng Shui. So let me see. So introduction, Feng Shui, that's how it's pronounced and written in Chinese. So it's a system of laws considered to govern spatial arrangement and orientation in relation to the flow of energy or qi, and whose favorable or unfavorable effects are taken into account when siting and designing buildings. So it's obviously very heavily influenced by Chinese culture. And today's presentation, I hope to answer the following questions: how Feng Shui can help you, why it is important, is the Feng Shui of a house unique to each family? Spoiler alert, it is. Can you mitigate bad Feng Shui? Yes, like I said, in 99% of cases. And how do the different elements interact? Because a lot of elements in Feng Shui interact with each other, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. Let me talk about that. So the first thing I want to talk about here is the household. When we talk about, whenever people ask me about their home in the context of Feng Shui, one of the first things I ask is, tell me about your household. How many people are there? What are their ages or rough ages? What do you guys do for, what's your occupation? Are there any physical abilities or limitations? And the reason I ask that is because the Feng Shui of one household is very different from the next. For example, let's say an 80-year-old retired couple has very different needs, Feng Shui, compared with a young family, right? So that's one of the first things I ask. One of the things I want to point out is that, it is not a good idea for a small family to occupy a very, very large space. And what I mean by that is, humans create human chi. And when you have a very big space that's not used very much or to its fullest extent, what happens is that there's not enough human chi to fill up the house. And then because there's not enough human chi to fill up the house, you may have negative elements moving in and taking over that space. So that's why it's important to know who's at home, what time of the day. For example, if you have a small family of let's say, husband and wife couple, let's just say, but both of them work at home, so they're at home most of the time. Now that's going to be different from, let's say, the same couple who are out of town most of the time and are not at home. I have been asked before if animals can take the place of human chi if, there are not enough people in a very big house. The short answer is no, not really. And another question I have been asked about this is also, is there a specific formula, like, how many people per square feet? Again, no. It's a matter of how much space you're used to. If you grew up in a big city like I did, you're probably going to be more used to smaller space per person. Whereas if you're more used to living in a big suburban house, then that's it's going to be a different story for you. Because one of the things that we pay attention to is harmony within the household. You have too many people within the too small space. There's going to be a lot more interactions. And, when you have more interactions, obviously there's more opportunity for conflict. So, yeah, pay attention to this. Do we have any questions at this point?
Yes, we do, Nicholas. Mike wants to know if you could elaborate more on how you even got interested in the topic of Feng Shui.
Yeah, I just saw the question from Mike. So how did I get interested? So growing up in Singapore, Feng Shui is something that everyone talks about once in a while. It comes up in conversation, almost like the weather sometimes. So my interest in it came about really in the last few years. And, I did more research and learning about it. And I, as a homeowner myself, I tinkered a little bit with it to increase the positive chi in my house and I have to say to quite a success. And I will share some personal stories in the presentation later. That's a good question. Thank you. Are there any other questions?
No, Nicholas, no questions yet.
Okay,
but I'm hoping that the audience starts sending them in.
All righty, let's move on. So the direction. So pay attention to the direction of where the following things are facing: the main entryway, windows, rooms, landscaping. This is a house, and there's a picture of a house on this slide, that I took last year. And as you can see from the arrows, the front of the house faces west. So the garage doors face west. The main door, which, by the way, is hidden, is also facing west. So imagine if you are a regular 9-to-5 professional and you leave the house in the morning, you come back in the evening. So this house faces the west. So what you're going to get when you leave in the morning, you are not going to be leaving the house where the sun is shining. you want to, then that's not good, because as you can see there, if you can see where the main door is, it's actually hidden. It's pretty dark there because there's a patio there, there's some shade there. You know, it provides nice shade in the evening if you're in the mood for, you know, in the summer to sit outside and drink some tea or something. That's great. But, you know, from the perspective of Feng Shui, that's not good, because there are dark corners that even at high noon when this picture was taken, you want to be bathed in sunlight as you leave the house. That helps you with your energy levels. That helps the house with qi. And also, you see right above the garage is actually the master bedroom. And if you're facing west there, your house is going to be very hot when you come back and you're trying to rest. You know, you're going to be in a very hot room. That's not good for your personal well-being. So pay attention to things like where the main entryway is facing. Generally, you want it to face east because of the sun. You also want, east or south. Why south? Because traditionally in Chinese history, when kings and emperors are crowned, they face south. So that's got something to do with that. Pay attention to the landscaping as well. And why is that? You look at that tree that is on the right side of the picture. So it's on the, I think that would be north of the house, and I'm sorry, that's south of the house. And that's good, because you don't want you don't want a huge tree that's covering the house on the east side, because you don't want the house to be dark in the morning. On the west side, that's good. You know, and the type of tree also matters. If you live in a climate like Colorado, you know, you might have a choice of coniferous trees or deciduous trees, you know, evergreen trees versus trees that shed their leaves in the fall. So if you have deciduous trees, i.e. trees that shed their leaves in the fall, it's not a bad thing to have them in the west, just because it gives you shade in the summer, and then in the winter, you know, you can get some sunlight and warm up your house. So there's a question here from Joanne. I've read that having trees or plants in front of your house may lead to bad flow for money. So short answer is it depends on the house, the tree, the size of the tree, the type of the tree. You know, it is possible. Weeping trees, she clarified. I don't know what weeping trees are. Are you able to tell me what they are very quickly?
Yeah, Nicholas, there is a question before you move off this slide. Is there any drawback if the main entranceway or the front door is hidden like it is in this particular photograph? Well,
yeah, there are drawbacks. Just like I said, you know, it's your main door. Good qi and bad qi enter and leave the main door, and you want to welcome good qi into the house. And when it's dark and hidden like that, bad qi tends to linger around the front door, and you don't want that. Although you can see that this being a typical suburban house in the American context, most people you know, just drive. As you can see, this is a 3-car garage house. So in this particular case, just because this is in a car-centric neighborhood and metro area, that may have less of an effect than another house that's more pedestrian-friendly, for example. So Joanne said willow trees. I don't know specifically about willow trees. I will have to do some research, and unfortunately, I won't be able to answer that question about willow trees being in front of your house leading to bad flow for money. So I'm gonna move on here really quickly for the sake of time. So shape, what do we mean by shape? The Chinese like regular shapes as well as round shapes. We do not like sharp edges. Sharp edges are bad, and that's also, by the way, why you will not see forks and knives in a traditional Chinese meal, because having sharp things at the dining table, no good. So pay attention to the shape of the land, rooms, the facade of the house, what the floor plan looks like, even how the staircase, if it's a 2 or even 3-story house, how it winds up or down the house. Pay attention to the spacing between the furniture. Avoid sharp edges and weird corners. I talked to someone in a local chamber of commerce here last year, and we had a meeting in the meeting room, which is in the basement of this, I want to say, the house must have been 80 years old, and they converted it into commercial use. So meeting room was in the basement of this old house. And they put a very huge conference table in the basement, and it was a full basement, so there were no windows. So they had artificial lighting, and unfortunately, the house, that basement, had this weird little corner where the table couldn't reach, and people couldn't really sit there. It's just a very odd shape. And so, you know, we were talking about Feng Shui, and they asked me what I thought about the Feng Shui of the basement, right? And I said, I really like the way you have remodeled this place. It looks really nice and clean, and you guys have noted that there are no windows in the basement, so you put a lot of lighting. But I do not like that weird corner there where you have, you know, utilized it for a TV stand, which is great. But the corners there are too dark, and then the chamber employee interrupted me and said, actually, you are right. Whenever we have meetings in this room, nobody wants to sit on that side of the room. I said, you see, there you go, because weird corner, dark corner, bad chi tends to linger there, and people can feel it. So she asked me, how can we mitigate that? I suggested, you know, just put a lamp there, you know, simple solution. Turn it on whenever you have guests or meetings here. So, and that's the way I like to present solutions to people. I don't tell them to tear down this door and change the location of that door, you know, simple fixes like this. They don't cost you a lot of effort, time, or money. So, yeah, the reason, just before I conclude this slide, you don't like weird corners is because it's hard to find furniture that will fit in weird corners, and even if you did find things to put in that corner, it tends to encourage that chi to linger. Let me show you what I mean. So on the picture on the left, you see stairs, and there's a landing. You see that the landing is very oddly shaped, and there's this weird corner where the owners of the house have put a coat rack or hanger and what looks like a pile of dirty laundry. So you see a weird corner, small space that you can't really do anything with. Junk starts accumulating there, and it looks unsightly, and it encourages bad chi to linger. Another thing, on the picture on the right, you see the shape of the furniture as well as the layout. So this is very obviously what looks like a finished basement, and there is a supporting beam in the middle of the basement, right? Otherwise, they would have removed it. So that's a bad thing to have, and I guess the owners of that house, of that space, try to mitigate that by, you know, putting the corner of the couch there, so that since, you know, it's not an entryway anyway, that kind of hides the effects of having a beam in the middle of the room. So that's not good. However, like I said, this is probably a supporting beam and you can't really do anything about it. But in this particular case, what I would do is to perhaps put put partitions around there so that it hides the beams and looks more natural. And I forgot to mitigate the issue on the picture on the left where there's that pile of dirty laundry and a coat hanger. I would suggest putting some potted plants there. Okay, any questions so far on this slide or anything I said?
Kristen has written a couple of questions in, and I'll start with one of them. What if you are currently in a house that is facing west? Are there other things you can do to fix the Feng Shui?
I would suggest planting a tree, but if you don't already have a tree there, it's going to take years for it to grow to a height and a size that would provide enough shade. You know, not really is the short answer. I'm not going to ask you to find a different job where, you know, you leave the house in the afternoon or evening. That's also not a practical solution. Just pay more attention to what you put on that side of the house. For example, let me see. For example, you might want to have your desk next to the window instead of your bed if you can help it. Yeah, that's what I suggest. Without seeing the whole house and the specific room and the furniture in the room there in context, it's very hard for me to provide specific advice. And like I said, the goal of the presentation here is to give general advice, give you enough information to be dangerous for you to go and do research, etc. So was there another question?
Yes. If the house you have has a master bedroom that will not allow you to have your head on the north wall, is there any help for that type of situation?
I'm sorry, the room will not allow your head or you know, the what you call it, yes, headboard to be on the north
headboard
side.
Of your bed on the north wall.
Mm-hmm. I would not worry too much about where your head rests in terms of direction. I would pay more attention to where it is in relation to the rest of the room. So I'm talking about things like how far away is it from the door? You know, is there a clear line of sight or path to the door? That kind of thing. I'm not generally, I generally tell people not to worry too much where the head rests, just because, you know, modern houses, we are very well protected from the elements. Whether your head lies north, south, east, or west doesn't really matter. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
no, not
next
yet.
slide. Okay, so here's another example of bad placing of furniture, and this is a very small room, and as you can see, there's a bunk bed there in an attempt to save some space and help make the room look just a little bit bigger. But because of the placement of the furniture, you can see that those two doors are actually, you know, a closet, and about half of the door on the left is blocked off. So essentially there's going to be kind of dead space right behind that spot, you know, to the left. And what happens when you have dead space is, again, clutter tends to accumulate, and clutter is bad for Feng Shui. It promotes bad mood. It promotes negative health in general. So just be mindful of where and how you place your furniture. In this particular case, you know, not much you can do about the size of the room, right? And beds come in rather standard sizes. I commend the owners for trying to save some space here by using a bunk bed, but if possible, move the bed away from the closet to another wall, away from the closet, so that you don't encourage dead space. So other examples of shape, look at the roof of the house on the left, sharp corners on the right side of the house, and then the picture at the bottom right is a different angle. So this is a very good example of when I say give you enough information to be dangerous so that you ask the right questions. So suppose you are looking at this house and you don't like the sharp edges, and you go, yeah, I don't like this sharp edge. I don't know why. Let me go do some research as to why. So there are practical implications to this as well. So Feng Shui is not just all spiritual and theoretical. There are practical implications as well. So imagine this house, in a very dry climate like Colorado, or maybe Arizona, let's just say, where it doesn't rain very often, right? So this is not a roof shape that will give you too many problems. But imagine this house in tropical climate like Florida, where it rains very often. The shape of the roof on this house here, it encourages water to flow down that one edge and to fall onto your lawn. And when that happens, you're going to have a pool of water, and when you have a pool of and stagnant water, and then your lawn on that particular spot, because of the weight of the water falling on it so often, grass will not grow. So then in order to mitigate that, then now you have to go find someone to build a spout specifically for that kind of purpose. It's going to cost you money. It's not going to look very pretty. So this is a perfect example of how Feng Shui elements interact. If this is a house in a drier climate, you don't have to worry so much. If it's a wetter climate, think about some of the things you need to do in order to mitigate that kind of problem. There's a question from Mary. Are there suggestions for encouraging creativity in a home office? I suggest for to encourage creativity, have a couple of fun items, little things to tinker around with that don't take up too much space on your desk. What is that thing? I can't think of a name for that thing there, where you have a series of 5 metal balls that are hanging, and then you release one on one side, it hits and moves. I don't know what it's called. If anyone can jog my memory here, something like that to distract you for a couple of minutes, but not too much, so you can get back to work. Or, you can go to the dollar store. They have a lot of fun toys that, kids play with a couple of times and then throw it out. Things that like a little mini basketball game. Yeah, something you can put away in the drawer to distract you just enough, but not enough that you don't do your work. So something fun. Perpetual motion balls. Thank you. Yep. So, yeah. Any other questions?
I don't see any.
Perfect. So another example of shape, just very quickly, I talked about the shape of stairs just now. So on the left, you see stairs that spiral, up to the second floor with landings, 2 landings. And this affords you privacy. So for a larger family, this will be good. And I generally encourage this kind of stairs if you can choose, as opposed to the stairs on the right where it's, straight up all the way. Good qi can leave the house very easily if you have the kind of stairs you see on the right, particularly if, the main door is right in front of these stairs. You want to try to avoid opening your main door to immediately to this kind of stairs that lead to the second floor. Yeah, and also coming back to what I was saying about, on the very first, one of the first few slides, who's in your household, what age, and so on and so forth. If you have a very young family with a toddler that's learning to walk, or, an elderly couple, the kind of stairs that's on the left is going to be more suitable, better for you too, right? Practical implications as compared to the stairs on the right. So generally, I tell people I like the kind of stairs you see on the left rather than the ones you see on the right. So very quickly, geography, I want to pay attention to, I'm sorry, I think I want to ask if there are any questions about the stairs. That slide tends to generate a lot of questions when I present this. Any questions about stairs?
Nothing's come in, Nicholas.
Okay, perfect. So geography, pay attention to the elevation and the slope of the house. Generally, you want to be on higher ground than your neighbors, as well as other things, especially roads or rivers. And I'll show you why here in the next couple of slides. So pay attention to, well, we talk about trees quite a bit. So trees, where they are, how big they are, what kind of trees, so on and so forth. Rivers, streams, and creeks are generally good. There are some exceptions. I'll come to that here with pictures later. And I want to talk a little bit about rivers, streams, and creeks. In Feng Shui, you want to have fast-flowing rivers near you, because if you think about it, traditionally, rivers, streams, and creeks are sources of water, right, for cooking, drinking, and so on, as well as in the case of bigger rivers, especially in the old world, commerce and trade. That's why a lot of importance is placed on being near water. But you want to be near a fast-flowing, should I say, a live body of water and not a dead one. I will show you some pictures later. You want to be away from main roads. That's pretty obvious, because there's noisy, there's pollution. But if you think a little bit more about it, roads are where huge chunks of metal weighing thousands of pounds going down at so many miles per hour. That is very negative qi. That's why you want to be far away from busy roads. Same thing with telephone poles and electric wires. They tend to carry negative qi and, are unsightly. Try and avoid them if possible. So as, lighting, be it artificial lighting or natural lighting. There's a question here from Susan. Is flooring important in Feng Shui, say carpet versus hardwood? Short answer is no, there isn't really. I would pay attention to the color, though, and how it interacts with the lighting of the house or the color of the walls or the color of the furniture. And speaking of color, one of the things I've been asked about is, does it matter if my walls are whatever color? Generally, no. You want to go with whatever theme you have in your house or you want for your house. You want to go with colors that you like. Okay. So here are some pictures of what I mean. So you see, oh, this is a stream, right? If you have a house near this, this is good, right? Well, look closer. Looks like it's not a moving stream. There's algae growing in this stream. That's not good. But not too bad of a problem if you were, say, again, in Colorado, which is where I took this picture. I took this at the height of summer. The water didn't stink. There were no mosquitoes or anything growing that water. So even though it's not a moving body of water, it's not so bad. But imagine if you were in a tropical climate, like, again, Florida or some parts of Texas. This is going to smell. You're going to be living near a mosquito breeding ground. And again, you see how Feng Shui interacts with the your surroundings. So yeah, there's a question from Joanne. Should you stay away from a pool in your backyard? There's nothing against pools anywhere in your house. Just make sure you keep it clean because water is seen as a source of wealth. In Chinese belief, there's a saying, 水如财, which means water is like wealth, literally. Just make sure that, if you have a pool, keep it clean, keep it well maintained. Another relevant question is, what about a pond or a small fountain? Those are good. The sound of water moving is very soothing. It attracts good qi. Okay. So some more examples of what I mean. So as you can see on the picture on the top left, I was walking along a footpath, and I turn to my left and I see this house. I can look directly into what looks like a bedroom or something on the second floor of the house because the house is on lower ground than a footpath. You don't want that. What do you want to do to mitigate that kind of thing? Well, ideally have a tree there, which there isn't. I think the owners of this house must have been trying to do something with that look. It's very clean. On the next house, which you see, the neighbor's house, right next door, you see this bunch of scraggly trees. That's actually on public land. It's not on the plot of land on the house itself. It's not maintained. As you can see, scraggly. It provides privacy. That's great. But if I were the owners of that house next door where these scraggly trees are, I would just make an effort to trim some of the grass and bush and trees, the branches that are here, just because you can see, again, this was taken at high noon in summer, and it looks so dark. Who knows what's hiding there, right? Okay, moving on. So these two pictures are examples of what is good feng shui for the siting of a house. Fast-moving stream here on the picture on the left, and it's slightly higher ground than the footpath, which is, again, some distance away from the house. So quiet neighborhood, nice fast-flowing river or stream, and slightly higher ground than surroundings. And if you lived in one of those houses and you look out your backyard, this is what you see. A playground, a trail further down that's on slightly higher ground. And the playground is good because it's some distance away from your house, which means noise from kids playing is not so much of an issue. But at the same time, kids that are playing brings good qi, and you want that. The fact that this playground is directly behind the house, but at a good distance, that's perfect. That's good feng shui from that perspective. So very quickly, any questions here so far? I think we have, let me see, 2 or 3 more slides here.
You answered the question about the flooring, carpet versus hardwood, right?
I did. I said that there was, not really any preference or difference. Yeah.
Yep. One just came in. Christina, how would one best place mirrors, and how many mirrors in a room are too many?
I love that question, and thank you for asking that, because I've been asked that before. Mirrors are very good and very useful in the context of feng shui because they can reflect bad elements away, or reflect or deflect bad elements. So sometimes you might see, maybe in some Chinese households, maybe not so common in the United States, but in, Singapore, for example, sometimes you see people put a trigram mirror right above their front door. outside their flats. It's actually to deflect bad chi, bad elements, or evil spirits. Because traditional belief is that ghosts can't see themselves in the mirror; they get scared or something. Yeah. So in the context of Feng Shui, what we want, for the room is you use mirrors to make rooms brighter or bigger. Put them where you can reflect natural light from a window to the rest of the house. How many mirrors are too many? I don't know. I want to say that if I see it, I will know it. But there's not any magical formula that says, for so many square feet of floor space or wall space, you need to keep it to so many mirrors. Yeah, I think you will know it if you see it. And was there another question there before I answer Jennifer's written question?
No, there's no other question other than the one you're looking at from Jen.
Okay, so the question is...
Oh, wait, hold on. Yeah, no, that's the same one from Jennifer.
Okay. Yeah, the question from Jennifer is, have you heard of the concept of applying the principles of Feng Shui to clothing and how it could be used to reinvent your career? No, I haven't, and I might have that's something I might have to go take a look at. My experience and research in Feng Shui is broadly on real estate, on homes and office buildings and commercial buildings in general. Yeah. Yeah. So I have a little anecdote about mirrors that I will share if there's enough time after the presentation. It's actually a pretty funny story. So very quickly on the history of the home. Do you know who the previous owners or tenants are? What was the house formerly used as if it functioned as something else, for example? Was it also a home office? Former use of the land? And was the house a crime scene? Let me elaborate on each one of these very quickly. Perhaps not so much in the United States, but in the old world, especially in Singapore, where land is very, very scarce and very expensive, redevelopment happens very fast. You have got homes, flats being built on what was formerly, could have been a cemetery. That's not good Feng Shui, because obviously disturbing the resting place of the dead. That's bad chi. What you could do in that case to mitigate that kind of thing is, I don't know, perhaps depending on what religion you belong to, and if you're spiritual or at all, I want to appease the spirits for disturbing their place, or leaving some sort of a monument to them to remember them. I'll give you a personal example here. I bought my house a few years ago, and it was an estate sale. The previous owner of the house had died unexpectedly, and the executors of her estate were her brother and her father, who signed the papers at closing. So we knew that she had died unexpectedly. A 50-ish-year-old woman who lived alone in a relatively large house for one person, and we learned that she was very well loved, and our neighbors after we moved in told us that she was a flight attendant and she flew to Asia a lot, so the house is very empty. So that gave me something to work on, and then, when we moved in, we felt that, maybe the chi here doesn't feel quite right. Why is that? Then we learned about that she was alone. She didn't have kids. She was away a lot. So then after we moved in, my wife at the time was a stay-at-home mom with young kids. So because they were at home all the time, the human qi displaced the bad qi that had moved in when, you know, when the previous owner lived here. And also the house was empty for a few months after she passed away. And, you know, because this house used to belong to someone that had passed away unexpectedly, we figured that we'll leave a couple of things where they are just to honor her memory, because, again, she was very well loved. And, some of you may think this is superstitious or just, you know, out of this world, but my wife swears that she thought one time she was playing with the spirit of the former owner was playing with, you know, our then 3-month-old son. And then after she realized that, you know, it's a young, happy family that moved in here, you know, she figured that, you know, yep, it's time for her to move on. So again, you know, some of you might find this a bit scary or, you know, superstitious, but I stand by that story. Yeah. And let me see here. I have another story about crime scenes of houses that I can share if there's time later, because we're running short on time. So this will be the last slide before the final Q&A slide, but pay attention to the presence or absence and the locations of, you know, kitchen and bathroom vents, very important. You know, who are your neighbors? What kind of neighborhood is it in? Is there a back door? What does it lead to? Does it lead to that scraggly, you know, a piece of land like we saw in the previous slide, you know, to a footpath that's 5 feet, 8 feet taller than your backyard? Swimming pool or pond, you know, there was a question asked about that just now. You know, if there's one, just make sure that the water the pond or the swimming pool is well maintained and it's clean. Pay attention to numbers. The Chinese love the number 8 and don't like number 4, because number 8 sounds like prosper or wealth in Mandarin and other Chinese dialects. Number 4 sounds like death. If you're not particularly superstitious, that should not bother you. You know, pay attention to any dark spaces. We discussed that at length just now, as well as, you know, make sure that there's no clutter. And here's why. If you have clutter in the basement, if you have a basement and it's full of clutter, you know, the basement is like the, for lack of a better comparison, bowels of your body, right? It's not a nice feeling to be constipated. Likewise, if you have a basement that's full of clutter, not good. Same with garages. You know, I know some people, maybe a lot of people, I'm guilty of that myself, tend to store things in the garage, and, you know, you just one more thing until it looks so cluttered. Think about it. The garage, especially if you live in a car-centric city like me, the garage is the first place, the last place you see as you leave the house to go to work in the morning, and the first place you see when you come home from work and enter the house. That's not really a place where you want a lot of clutter. No? Yeah? So with that, I conclude my presentation. And if there are no other questions, I can share my story about mirrors, as well as, what was the other story? I can't remember. I had 2 stories to share. So I'm open for, yes.
Nicholas, thank you. There are a couple questions that have come in, so I'm just going to go to those.
Yep.
Is there a difference between a running water creek and an in-ground pond in terms of good qi?
When you say in-ground pond, do you mean an artificial river, or if you will, stream?
I don't know.
Artificial landscaping. There isn't. obviously, an artificial landscaping ponds or creeks costs money. If you can afford that, great. And of course, you have more control over how it looks, where it flows, how fast it flows even, and how clean you can keep the water. So there's definitely an advantage to artificial ones. But other than that, in terms of practical implications, no. Because think about it, I guess the real question, the intent in asking that question is, can you create good qi, right? Yeah, you absolutely can. And if you can afford, you have the luxury, monetary and space-wise, to be able to have artificial landscaping to improve the qi, absolutely, go for it. There's no such thing as artificial qi is, it's not better or worse. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question. In a bedroom, is there anything bad about a metal bed frame or a brass headboard versus a wood headboard?
No. Interesting question. I've never been asked that before. No.
Look at that. First time for everything.
Yeah.
Christina wants us to go back to earlier in the presentation where you showed a house where the front door was hidden. She wants to know, are there any other suggestions to mitigate that specific challenge?
Definitely have a light at this one. Definitely have a light or two at the front door. Try to keep it on throughout the day. You can see, again, this was taken at high noon, and look how dark it is. So keep the lights on even during the day. And, with LED lights nowadays, is really not very expensive to keep lights on. Maybe brighten up the space. In this particular case, the house is what looks like gray or some sort of dark green. It would help a little bit if the facade were painted a brighter color. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay, thank you. There's an overarching question that was shared earlier. Essentially, not every house is built perfectly for good
Correct.
Qi and Feng Shui. So do you have some thoughts on what can be done to combat that with some of the very basic elements of Feng Shui, other than what you've already shared?
When building a new house, what should you pay attention to? that
Sure.
is the question, right?
Sure, that.
Yeah, well, take into consideration the needs of your family and how it will change as you go through the usual life cycles, if you would, having a family, having a bigger family, what happens when the kids grow up and stuff like that. You can never, you're right, the presumption, the statement, pre-statement to that was you can never have great Feng Shui. I did a mortgage loan for a Taiwanese couple before, and at the closing table, the husband told me how they had built it was a new construction, and they hired a prominent Feng Shui master to consult with them, and the house was built according to that Feng Shui master's specifications. When the house came back appraised for much lower than they thought it was, the husband was very insulted, right? So my point here is that you can make use of the best consultant or these principles of Feng Shui to help you with building the perfect house. But things change all the time, and you need to be evaluating your needs and how things are have changed around you as time goes on. So that's, if there's one thing that you can take away from the presentation, that would be think about how it relates to your needs. Have your needs changed? Has the environment changed?
All right, we've got about 3 minutes left, so do you want to share your mirror story and then we will conclude?
Yeah, so in the shopping district of Singapore, there is this there's this shopping mall, and in order to I guess the owners of that shopping mall wanted to curse their neighbors across the street. So what they did was they hired an architect that designed the building to look like tombstones, so that every day the neighbor across the street would look at tombstones, which is very bad luck, right, in Chinese belief, and so bad chi. So in order to mitigate that, their neighbors, as the legend goes, when they remodeled the building, covered the outside of the building with reflective material so as to, you know, reflect the tombstone back at them. So I thought that was a funny story to share. Yeah, and a very good example of how you can use mirrors to mitigate bad feng shui. I see we have 1 minute. Do I have time to share another story really quick?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was talking about, you know, the history of the house, you know, whether it was a crime scene. I haven't verified this story before, but it makes sense to me the way it was told. So I was told that there's this commercial property in a very busy stretch of Denver that is now a strip club, you know, gentleman's club, if you would call it that. And I was told that many years ago a murder had happened on that property. So and shortly after the a murder, that was some sort of a restaurant was set up there, and it failed. And then after the restaurant failed, you know, this strip club business came in, and they're prospering. So again, I didn't verify how true. I didn't go and verify the facts of the story, but I thought that makes sense because, you know, if a murder had happened, you know, this is very ominous to talk about, but if a murder had happened in that property, there's bad chi, right? Lingering spirit, if you will. Yeah, you don't want to open a bed and breakfast in that kind of on that kind of property. However, if you have a club, you know, or in this case a strip club, you know, you have vice going on. This kind of activity tends to happen at night. You know, when the sun doesn't shine, a lot of noise, it suppresses the bad chi. So, you know, obviously this doesn't really apply in the context of home ownership. You can't really, you know, open a nightclub in your home. Most cities have ordinances against that kind of thing. But that's a very good example of, you know, even in the most extreme circumstances, you can mitigate bad feng shui by just, in this case, changing the type of business that you run on that kind of property. All right?
All right, thank you. We are out of time, so if there are any additional questions, you can email them to ritalum@rit.edu or tweet them to us at @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #RIT webinars, and we will get you some answers from Nicholas. As I mentioned at the beginning, all of participants will receive an email from us in the next week with a link to today's recording. Nicholas, thank you again for being our presenter today, and thanks to all of you out there for participating in today's webinar. Please consider joining us next week on Tuesday, is it Tuesday, January 16th, for Tracing Our Ancestors Using Genetics to Investigate Genealogy with RIT alumnus Dr. Rick Kittles. Again, it's after the hour, so thank you all, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.